my colleagues, my Civil War buddies, tell me that in the middle of the making of the movie, they had a discussion with Denzel Washington, and he said something. And I don't know if it's true or not, but this is a story. They said that Denzel told them that, hey, you want to know the difference between actors and reenactors? And they said, what's the difference? What's the difference? We're all acting like soldiers. We got uniforms, but he said, we get paid and you guys don't.
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. Counting down to the upcoming celebration of America's 250th birthday, you'll meet families from each state whose stories are woven into the very fabric of America. Tales of immigration, migration, courage, and community that remind us that when we tell our stories, we strengthen the bonds that connect us. So join me for season 2 as we discover from sea to shining sea, the stories that live in us. Do you ever have a conversation with someone that you wish would just keep going? My guest today is one of those kinds of people that you just want to sit and listen to and ask questions of. He is brilliant, but he is also a brilliant storyteller. Calvin Osborne is a Washington, D.C. area attorney who several times a year heads out onto a battlefield to do Civil War reenactment. And I'm fascinated by that. He is a student of particularly African-American military history. Now, in the D.C. area, he's affiliated with the Massachusetts 54th as a reenactor, but he has recently, through his family history research, discovered a connection to Kansas. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about Kansas in the Civil War. I had family who lived in Illinois and Missouri in the 1840s, but by the 1850s, my family had left. But the people there were engaged in some really, really messy border disputes. When you think about conflicts over slavery that led up to the Civil War, I think a lot of times we just think it just sprung up in the 1860s. But the Kansas border disputes started in 1854, and they lasted almost a full decade. Then the Civil War erupts, and there's several more years of fighting and a lot of need for soldiers. And in Kansas is where we find the Kansas First, which my guest today is going to tell you all about his discovery of the Kansas First and their service to our country. And after you listen to my conversation with him, you might want to go grab a copy of his book. It is called Contraband Hearts, and it's a love story set against this backdrop in Kansas. Enjoy my conversation with Calvin Osborne. Well, Calvin, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have this conversation. I understand you live in Maryland now. Have you lived there long?
I have lived here since about 2003, so quite a bit of time. I've lived in the D.C. area since 1992, so a little more than 30 years. I moved here from Kansas City, but I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay, so you've been around a little bit.
I have. Yep. I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Kansas City, and now on the East Coast. And so I've seen the gamut, I guess.
Yeah, what took you out to the East Coast?
A job opportunity brought me to the East Coast. I was practicing law in Kansas City at the time, and something that I was doing. I guess I did it quite well, but the people in Washington took note and called me up and asked me if I'd like to come to D.C. Having not ever been to D.C. at the time, I thought, well, hey, I'm in my early 30s. I'd give that a shot. So I came and liked it and stayed.
Well, there you go. But do you still have family in the Midwest?
I do. I have family mostly in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm from originally. And my family moved from Tulsa to Phoenix when I was in high school. But we only stayed out there, my family did, for about 6 or 7 years. And they moved back to Tulsa. And so my parents were basically in Tulsa when they sort of got to their golden years. And so I spent a lot of time going back and forth to Tulsa. They're both now passed on, but I still have a sister and a brother in Tulsa now.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up with them and with your parents and in Tulsa. Like, were you surrounded by family and family stories and what that looked like for you?
Oh wow. It was we didn't have any money. Things were always tight as far as back as I can recall. But our childhood and our upbringing was magical nonetheless. We didn't spend time on computers or looking at websites. We spent time walking in a creek, in the afternoons, walking with our shoes off and our bare feet in the shallow creeks, looking for tadpoles and what we call crawdads. I guess they call them crawfish these days, or people in the southern part of the country. We call them crawdads, but we would look for those and hope not to get pinched on our toes and that kind of thing. And so we would spend most of our days just kind of exploring abandoned areas, creeks, things of that nature, learning how to build tree houses, just basically living outdoors as much as we possibly could. Now kids are so busy inside. I mean, we spent all of our time outside. So that's what made it magical. And plus, I had four brothers, and two sisters, and so we played every sport in the yard, and we had a nice big yard on the side of our house, and so it was our football field, our softball diamond, our soccer pitch, everything, So and my sisters were just as busy and athletic as my brothers, and so it made for a nice big Brady Bunch type upbringing, and
That does sound magical.
yeah, and every Sunday or so, or at least a couple of times a month, our cousins would come over in large numbers. It'd be 7 or 8 of them come over. We'd turn the small football game from 5 or 6 people into like 10 people, and so it really made it a lot of fun. And reunions every summer to talk about who passed on and who's got a new child and what the family looks like now, that sort of thing. It was magical.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell me a little bit about your parents. Were they from Oklahoma or were they from elsewhere?
Both of my parents were from Oklahoma and from the same area of Oklahoma, from Tulsa County. It was a little town back then called Alsuma. My mother was born in a little town called Broken Arrow, which back then used to be, in my mind, a long Sunday ride after Broken Arrow. It was like 12 miles from downtown Tulsa. But when I was a kid, it was a long ride, and this Broken Arrow was not really a part of Tulsa. It was like a real small town you got away to. Now it's just a Tulsa suburb. People are out there in 15 minutes on the expressway. But my dad is from that area of Oklahoma, northeastern Oklahoma, and so is my mother. Their parents, my mother's parents, came up to northeastern Oklahoma from southern Oklahoma, and where her father was from, and his father and their parents. So they were what you call the Choctaw freedmen. So they were descendants of slaves to the Choctaws, and southern Oklahoma is really Choctaw territory. In fact, there's a county called Choctaw County, and a few little tiny towns that are in that county is where I've always heard that my family on my mother's side came from. A little town called Idabel, Idabel. And then but my father his family was from the Broken Arrow area, which is basically where, as I mentioned, where Broken Arrow is today in Wagner County, just to the east of Tulsa. And so when my mother's family moved to the Northeast, probably looking for work, that's how it is that they ended up meeting. So,
That's delightful. I know exactly where Broken Arrow is. My mama's family's all from the northwest corner of Arkansas,
oh,
and some of her aunts and uncles ended up in Broken Arrow and lived there their whole lives.
well, great. Well,
As you think about, like, your hobbies now and what you do now outside of work, what are some of the things that you do now?
well, I'm very community oriented. I'm very active in my church. I go to a church called Fort Washington Baptist Church in Fort Washington, Maryland. Pastor Darren Poulard is our leader there. So I spend time working with people in the church. I spend time focusing on the history committee, making sure that people study and understand and appreciate history in general, and most particularly African American history here. But the most interesting, I think, probably and the most important hobby that I have participated in has been Civil War reenacting. That is my vocation is I'm an attorney, but my avocation is Civil War reenacting, and so I've been involved in that for quite some time.
What got you interested in that?
Well, I've always had sort of an affinity for the Civil War era. It's just always been an enigma to me that a country could fight itself to that level, you know. And the more I learned about it, the more I thought I need to learn even more about it. How did this, how did this unfold? How did this come about? And so I saw a movie once back in 1989. Funny, I remember getting prepared to go and see a movie, and I'd asked the person who I was going to go to the movie with that night if she wanted to go see the Morgan Freeman film. All right, and she said, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea. I think that's going to be a good movie. I'm excited about seeing it tonight." Right. So back then you had to go buy your tickets in advance. You couldn't do that whole internet thing we do now. So I went and got tickets to the Morgan Freeman film, which was Glory, right? We get to the theater and then we go down the hallway to go to the Morgan Freeman film, and I turn left and she turns right. I'm like, "Wait a minute, where you going?" She's like, "Wait a minute, where are you going?" So I'm like, "Morgan Freeman's film is down here." She said, "No, it's down here." I'm like, "Okay, I bought the tickets and I have them. I'm telling you that it's down here." Turns out he was starring that night in two films that were both premiering. My movie was Glory, of course. Hers was Driving Miss Daisy.
Ah.
Well, she thought we were gonna go see Driving Miss Daisy, and I'm thinking we're gonna see Glory, a military film, yeah. We saw Glory, and I was absolutely blown away by the film. And I did not know until that film that there were African Americans, that there were black men fighting in the Civil War to eradicate slavery. And I'd read a lot of textbooks about the Civil War, I'd read lots of articles about the Civil War, I'd read, lots of a number of books about the Civil War, but none of them talked about black men actually fighting to help eradicate slavery. That film, had me shook. I'm thinking, well, is this really true or not? And the more I looked into it, the more I realized it was in fact true. And so that set me I guess on a track to try to figure out and find out and explore the true involvement of black men in the Civil War. As a young African American man myself, I thought it was basically my duty to understand how my foreparents participated in the Civil War. So um, being in Kansas City, there wasn't a lot there, at least in my mind at that time, that I could learn about it. Okay, and so I did what I could. But a couple of years after that, as I mentioned, I was sent to D.C. and I thought, oh, great, D.C. There is a lot of Civil War stuff around D.C. and Virginia. I thought every single time I get an opportunity, I'm going out to study one of these battles. I'm going to go to these battlefields that are around the D.C. area and all the way across Virginia on weekends. And that's what I started doing. And I learned so much about the Civil War that I just got more and more engulfed in the conflict and how it transpired.
That is an incredible origin story into a hobby that has become an avocation. That's amazing. I know a few people who that movie altered their perception of a lot of things.
Yes.
And as you have studied this, at what point did you start to think about how your personal family might connect to the things that you were discovering about Civil War history?
Well, it took a while. I started studying this when I came to DC in 92 and joined the organization shortly afterwards. I joined the Civil War reenacting group here. And that was the group that actually made the movie Glory. They were behind Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman. And so when I met them, I thought, hey, you guys are the reason I'm here. So I was able to actually join the Civil War reenactors who made that movie that I saw a couple of years before. And so I started studying, making sure that I didn't miss any meetings. And at every meeting, I would learn more and more about the Civil War and the involvement of what they call United States colored troops, right? And or black men. in the Civil War. And so we would have speakers come in. We would go to other places and speak, colleges, high schools, that kind of thing. And it took me a while to kind of get my feet under me to begin to be able to speak about it with some authority about the actual events and what happened, and turn myself into a historian. I was already a lawyer, but I was now becoming a historian. So, and one of the things we did, Krista, we really cared about being period correct. We really cared about making sure that if we're going to talk about the Civil War, if we're going to give people an impression about it, we want to make sure that it's absolutely accurate. My colleagues, my Civil War buddies, tell me that in the middle of the making of the movie, they had a discussion with Denzel Washington, and he said something, and I don't know if it's true or not, but this is a story. They said that Denzel told them that, hey, you all want to know the difference between actors and reenactors? And they said, what's the difference? What's the difference? We're all acting like soldiers. We got uniforms, but he said, we get paid and you guys don't. So, but what happened was I just really threw myself and immersed myself into Civil War reenacting, and that meant that I had to learn how to talk like Civil War soldiers, learn to study the things that they were challenged by, and at some point I had to get up on the stage and sort of bring some of those soldiers to life, and sort of do a soliloquy, in first person of a soldier to let people see what a soldier's like, what they think about, what they talk about, how they feel and that sort of thing. I got kind of used to that. And a lot of years went by, Krista. And then one day, CNN called me up after a conversation that I had, an electronic conversation I had, and they wanted to talk to me about my father's involvement in World War II, right? But after talking about that, they said, you seem like an interesting fellow. Do you mind if we study your background? And I told them I was a Civil War reenactor, and they heard the same story I'm telling you about how I got involved. And they said, well, why do you do that? I'm like, well, I don't know. I just know that I can't stop. It feels like a calling now, and I feel like if we don't do it, it's a very small group of guys in D.C. If we don't do it, no one will, and the truth about Black men in the Civil War will probably die out because there wasn't much out there to begin with, but one thing led to another, and CNN came back about a month later and said, we found some interesting things about your background. Do you mind if we talk to you about it? And they're the ones who told me that my great-great-grandfather was actually in a group called the 1st Kansas Colored Troops, and they were the very first Black men to actually fight in the Civil War. So that floored me, So that's how I learned about it. And that was just a jarring moment for me.
Your calling maybe was coming directly from the ancestors, yeah?
Seems like it. I've heard that if you reach out for your ancestors, they'll reach back, and I used to think that was just a saying, in our community, but I think it's something to it now.
Yeah, I absolutely think there's something to that. When CNN came to you to present that information to you, that was actually a research project that had been done by our story producers here at Ancestry. And what was that experience like, learning that information?
The CNN interview was life altering for me. My wife and I were planning to go to Alabama that summer, and we were planning to have our little 1-week vacation. And when CNN called up and said, "Hey, we want to come do this," right in the middle of COVID, we want to do come to your home and do a video shoot. I thought, okay, well, that's great. And they said, well, we want to come on this date. And I talked to my wife and said, hey, can we push our drive to Alabama back a day or two so I could do this video? And she was kind enough to agree. And so when the production crew came and set up on my deck back there, I thought, well, this is kind of interesting and cool. My neighbors were peeking out the window and everything. And so in the middle of COVID, so we had masks on until we got out on the porch and everything. I think it must have been like 2021 is my guess. I forgot exactly what year it was. But they came in and they said, we found some interesting stuff. We'd like to talk to you about it on camera. I thought it was great. And they started to reveal to me that they asked me what I knew about my ancestors. I really didn't know anything. I knew that my father was in World War II, but that's all I knew. But CNN came in and basically said, along with Ancestry, they said we could even go farther back with your lineage in terms of the battles. And then they told me that they turned the page or something like that. what about this name? They said, read this name, William Lacey. I said, I don't know who that is. They said, well, that's your great great grandfather. He was a soldier with the First Kansas. I was floored, Krishna. For a couple of seconds, I couldn't speak. I thought, wait a minute, 29 years, something like that, of studying Black soldiers, 29 years of trying to give voice to people just because I felt like they deserved a voice, 29 years of figuring out what they felt, trying to figure out what they felt, what they thought about the people who loved them, what the people who loved them thought about them and their interest in getting involved in a war where they may never come home. 29 years of paying attention to what they wear, how it felt, going out in the hot sun, laying in the grass, sleeping in tents, trying to get a feel for what they went through, right? And now I find out that what I've been searching for all along is this connection to my own family, you know. And when they said that when Nico said this is your great great grandfather, it all made sense. It was like a puzzle that just clicked, and everything else turned, the right colors, the right everything. I'm thinking, wow, now it all makes sense why I couldn't quit. I quit my group 2 or 3 times and maybe lasted a couple of days. So I said, I'm just too busy, guys. My daughter's born. I got this, I got that. I can't come out every weekend, every other weekend. A couple of days go by, I'm like, oh, okay, this is really important. It's only 50 of us in the country who do this, and we're not getting any younger. And if I quit, and at the time I was one of the younger people, and if I quit, this is a story that probably doesn't get told. And then when they revealed that to me, I thought this all makes sense now. And now all of a sudden I felt this huge, you know, sense of pride swell up in me and well up and just thought, hey, I just got connected to my past and my ancestors and, you know, and I'm something now. And now that I know who these people are, my shoes got a little heavier, because
Yeah.
I felt like I'm much more solid now that I know what this is all about. And I'm going to sing myself into what this guy, William Lacey, is all about and figure it all about. So, yeah.
So, for those who are listening who aren't familiar with the U.S. colored troops, can you just give us a brief explanation of how that all came about?
Sure, sure. Black men in this country have always volunteered to fight to help preserve freedom in this country, even when that freedom was elusive for them. There were 5,000 black men who fought in the Revolutionary War, but no one talks about them. The only people the only people of color that the history books remember is Christmas Attucks. And that's because he was the first person killed in the Revolutionary War, up in Boston. Remember? So, but the Civil War, when it was upon the country, most black men, a lot of black men, offered themselves up to fight on the side of the Union and to help eradicate this horrible scourge of chattel slavery. But they were rebuffed for the first couple of years of the war. And the rebels, the Confederacy, continued to win most, if not all, the battles the first couple of years of the Civil War. All the while, black men from different organizations in different cities across the country continued to knock on the doors and say, "Hey, let us fight. We have a lot to gain here, a lot to lose too." But after a while, the North just began to realize we don't have any more men. And so what you had was the first Kansas colored troops who were organized in 1862, actually, and fought out there. Then you had the Louisiana Native Guard, which was a very interesting group of black soldiers in the Civil War because most of them spoke French and English. Being from the Louisiana area. And then you had the Massachusetts 54, which is a group that I represent typically when I go out and do reenactments. But what happened was you had, one or two, United States colored troop groups begin to participate in the Civil War. And I think the prevailing, wisdom at that time became, hey, these guys really will fight and they really will train and they really will obey orders. And all of a sudden, the North had 200,000 brand new soldiers that they didn't have before. And according to President Lincoln, that turned the tide of the Civil War. So, and most of the battles that black men fought in were smaller battles, but he said it turned the tide because it gave them 200,000 new soldiers that the South couldn't keep up with.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you think about Kansas makes sense, right? Because it's a border state.
Right.
But you mentioned South Carolina, you mentioned Louisiana. Those are deep South states. How are black men in those states where slavery is almost the rule of law, even during the Civil War, even, like in the midst of all of that, how are they raising troops and getting away with that?
Well, you have to remember too that when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in September 1862, one of the things that he put in Emancipation was a clause that basically said that if you were in the South, if you were in one of the states that were in rebellion, basically the Confederacy, if you were living in the Confederacy and you were a slave, if you could get to the Union Army, when the Union Army comes through your county, the Union Army would protect you. And that became not only a way to get out of slavery. I mean, Canada's pretty far, okay,
Yeah.
if you live in Georgia. But if all you got to do is go next door to the next county, and there's a federal army there that'll protect you from your enslavers. People thought, hey, I think people thought, hey, that's a better option. In addition to that, they had an opportunity, some of them, to become actual soldiers and join those ranks, which also meant food, rations, sometimes a uniform if they had some available, and some of them became soldiers just by leaving the county or waiting for the federal army to come near, and knowing that they'd have some protection, they'd be out of this horrible scourge of slavery.
So I'm not overly familiar with this particular part of history, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, but as those Black people came into those federal military camps, was the word contraband, is that associated with contraband camps? Am I remembering that correctly?
You are absolutely right. They called it. Sometimes they would flow into the military camps in numbers like 200, 300. And if you're the person who's in charge of that regiment, you can't all of a sudden feed 300 people. You can hardly feed yourself, your own soldiers, right? And so oftentimes those 200 or 300 people, because they left their plantation, they had to walk behind the regiments because they didn't have any place else to go. They didn't know which direction to go in a lot of cases. And to the extent that they could help the army, that was always a good thing. So yes, you would have contraband camps.
And so then do the U.S. colored troops then come out of those contraband camps mostly? I mean, they're congregated groups of individuals watching the federal army fight.
Right. General Butler is the first person to begin to call them contraband, and yes, a lot of the United States colored troops did come out of the contraband camp. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. My great great grandfather William Lacey came out of one of those contraband camps. He was an escaped slave from the Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. Now that's the Broken Arrow area. But he and his teenage girlfriend, I'll call him at that point, escaped from Oklahoma up into Kansas. And when they got to Kansas, the first Kansas colored troop was bivouacked or right there resting in Fort Scott, Kansas, just outside the wall. They were training and waiting for their orders to go to the front to battle. And they were there for a matter of weeks and weeks and weeks, training and getting stronger and recruiting. And so my great great grandfather presented himself to them, trying to be a soldier, but they say you're too young. So they spent their time in a contraband camp trying to help, find a way to make a living.
Tell us a little bit about the Kansas First and how it came about, and then how your ancestor got involved.
Well, the first Kansas was organized by a senator from Kansas by the name of James Lane, Lane. He had created some political relationships with soldiers who he trusted and he knew were real true abolitionists like himself. One by the name of James Williams, right? And he tapped James Williams to become the leader of the first Kansas colored troops. And they did this back in the summer of 1862, even before they told President Lincoln that they were going to raise Black troops. They decided, Senator Lane did, I know what I'm going to do, and I may tell the president about this, or I may not. And so in 1862, they raised about 600 or 600 or 700 Black men, and they called them the first Kansas colored troops. So about half of them came from northeastern Kansas, around Leavenworth and Topeka, and then well, I should say they signed up there, and then about half of them came from southeast Kansas, like my great great grandfather, and that was around towns like Fort Scott and Mound City. Most of these Black men came over as escaped slaves from Missouri into Kansas because the word got around that you could join the first Kansas colored troops and fight in the Civil War and get paid, maybe, right? And then a lot of people came up from the Indian Territory to join the Civil War effort as well. And so that's how the first Kansas Colored Troop was formed. The Battle of Island Mound. That's the very first battle that Black soldiers fought in the Civil War. It also had Native Americans, Indians from the Indian Territory involved. So you had a really diverse, ethnically diverse Civil War crew in the first Kansas. You had white leaders because that's the way it had to be. And they acquitted themselves very nicely. But a few months later, after the turn of the year and the Emancipation Proclamation getting issued and everything, all of a sudden Lincoln said, "Well, it really is a good idea to get black men in the Civil War, but let's go ahead and organize them in a way that makes them federalized, right?" So the first Kansas, the troops were raised by the state of Kansas. The first Kansas Colored Troop became the 79th U.S. United States Colored Troops. They became federalized, right? They fought, I don't know, 7 or 8 battles all across what they call the Trans-Mississippi River area.
Wow. That's amazing. It's so interesting because I think sometimes we oversimplify the Civil War and the ideology behind the Union and the Confederacy. And you think, everyone on the Union side was for the, freeing of the slaves and keeping the country together and all the things that sometimes gets oversimplified too. And then you have complicated situations like this where, federal law is still prohibiting black men from serving in particular roles.
I would have to believe that, and I've read accounts. I think people's motivation for going to the Civil War varied just like it would today. I mean, if you look at our Army, I'll guarantee if you interview 100 people in today's Army, some people will say, "Well, I did this because my dad did it. I did it because my granddad and my great-great, we all went to the military, and we think this is a tradition. Our family loves it." Other people might say, "Well, hey, I really didn't know what to do out of high school, so it was a good idea." Some people will say, "Well, hey, I want to fight for freedom for America, and I want to, make sure that people across the world don't take advantage of it." It'll be all sorts of motivation, I'm sure, just like it was back then.
Well, tell us a little bit more about William Lacey. How, he was initially rejected from any kind of participation because he was too young, and then at what point was he allowed to participate?
Well, I don't think he was. I don't think he was thinking of this, but by the time he turned 17, maybe a couple of years later, he spent a couple of years trying to eke out a living. I had a tiny little farm on the back of their shack, and working odd jobs to try to buy things that he couldn't grow. A couple of years went by, and it was just a difficult time. But what happened was a man named Sterling Price was coming across Missouri. He had been a Missouri governor, but when the Civil War broke out, he decided he wanted to be on the side of the Confederacy, right? And so he decided to go down to Arkansas and join the Confederacy. And of course, the Confederacy commissioned him to go back and fight in Missouri, to carry the Confederate flag, the battle flag, across Missouri. So he started a campaign from southeast Missouri, which is just north of Memphis, okay? And he came all the way across the state of Missouri, killing and burning everything that he possibly could. But the word got to Kansas as he turned west from St. Louis and headed toward Kansas City and Westport. The word got to that area before he could. And so what happened is the state of Kansas decided to raise a militia, kind of like a National Guard now, a temporary militia. So they raised a militia. The governor of Kansas sent out an order, basically ordering every able-bodied man who was 16 and above to go to your county and join the Kansas militia, and they did not differentiate between black and white. Although the law did. The law at the time, and even in Kansas, said black men don't go to the military. But William Lacey and the rest of a lot of other black men did show up and say, I think they meant all of us. Some of the newspapers said, "Hey, this is not a time to be separating based on race because Sterling Price is going to kill everybody, black and white. He is not going to differentiate whether you are white or black in this county. They're going to kill everybody because he wanted to kill abolitionists, right? You heard about the whole Missouri-Kansas border wars. That's what it was all about back then. And so the border wars. They even have a football game this weekend, tomorrow, in fact, where Kansas played Missouri. The nickname of their game?
They still call it the Border War?
The Border Wars. Okay.
Oh, gosh.
It's called the Border Wars. We'll watch it tomorrow when I watch it. Most people won't realize what that's about. Back to your question about how he got involved, he took the call. He accepted the call from the governor to show up at the county. And then what happened was they did some training for like 3 or 4 weeks because they knew that Pat Price was coming across there at some point. And when they got to word, they had to take off from southeast Kansas and go up to Kansas, what we now call Kansas City. It was Kansas City then, but it wasn't the big trading post. There's a town there at the time it was called Westport. Now it's just a little village in Kansas City, inside of Kansas City. It's been engulfed. But Westport was a big trading post back then. It was the westernmost trading post for settlers going out to the west. Once you left Kansas City, there wouldn't be anything until you get to California. So you had to stock up in Westport on items. And so that made Westport very valuable. Well, Pap Price, it was his nickname, Pap, Sterling Bright, he wanted to burn down Westport. And so William Lacey, along with 12,000 other men from Kansas, hustled up to Kansas City and fought him and turned him back south and beat him at what they call the Battle of Westport. William Lacey was only 17 years old when he fought in that battle, and it was a very interesting battle from a standpoint of who participated. You had on William Lacey's side, all these guys were 17, 18. Was a man named William Hickok. Okay, we called him Wild Bill Hickok. He became famous, 20 years later for being a sort of an outdoorsman and a card shark out in the West. Also, a guy named William Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill. He was in that battle. He was a spy on William Lacey's side, on the side of the Union there. On the other side were a couple other guys who were already famous because they were famous killers. Frank and Jesse James were on that other side. So the Battle of Westport included all of these guys, and my little simple, escaped slave great-great-grandfather, William Lacey, who was 17. I think the rest of them were about the same age, and most of them hadn't really made their name except for Frank and Jesse James because they were murderers already, and they were a couple of years older than William Lacey. But that's how he got involved in the battle. And then after they won the battle, he realized that, hey, I can actually do this military stuff, So, and I don't have a job back home, and there's not a whole lot of food, around here because I've been gone for several weeks. I'm just going to join the military, the actual military, the regular army, the 1st Kansas. By then, they were already down in Arkansas, but they could still get reinforcements from time to time. You could go to the local post office or wherever and sign up for the 1st Kansas. You would get your check, give it to your wife and take off, go join the battle. And that's what he did. So that's how he got involved in the war. It's a long answer to your question, but that's what happened.
That's amazing. So you started your interest in Civil War history in 1989 with the movie Glory. You've spent all this time and energy and attention learning about this history, learning firsthand accounts. And like, about how far into that when you learned you had this connection through this great-great-grandfather?
Wow, it was a while. I mean, just 32 years I've been involved in Civil War reenacting, but I've only known about my ancestor for like the last 3 years. So,
Did you think about like all of this time and all of this investment and history that you've invested in Civil War reenactment, Civil War representation, Civil War study, I suspect, learning that you had a great-great-grandparent who was part of that? How did that change your perspective?
Krista, it just added validity to what I've been going around the country saying about Civil War soldiers. I'd been talking about the Civil War and what happened, from a standpoint of someone who studied it sort of as a third person. But now, once I learned that and began to study him and see what he did and went through and how he lived his life, that sort of thing, it feels like to me that it adds validity to my story when I get on the stage and talk now, because now I'm not just talking about somebody who fought in the war. I'm talking about my great-great-grandfather. I have a direct connection to the people who helped to fight and make this country what it is today. And so it added a little, made my shoes a little heavier, made me feel like I know where I'm standing now. I got every right to stand and be and say what I want to say about the Civil War because I can prove it, And it just validated, I think, some of the research that I've done over the years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you've chosen to write about some things. Tell us about that experience.
Yep. I spent 3 years researching this guy once I got a name. I mean, that's all they gave me was a name. And they said that he was in the first Kansas Color Troop. And that was enough because I'd spent 29 years studying soldiers. I thought, oh, I'm good. I'm good to go. I it just so I have been prepared to find this man, find his life, put some meat on his bones, and tell the world who he was. And I tried to figure out if there's anything unique about him that people would be interested in terms of reading about him. So what I did, I just started gathering research. I'd go out to the little town where I heard he was from. I'd look around at the place and get a feel for what it might have looked like, in 1863. I talk to people at the Historical Society. I go to the county records, the office, and look for property records and things like that. And of course, I'm going to be curious about the last name, Lacey, because it's not exactly an African name, I didn't think. I figured it must have been some sort of an English or Irish name, and I was right. And so that helped me a little bit in terms of finding out more about his enslavers. But that's what I did. And I looked up one day after 3 years, and I said, I got to do something with all this research, Krista. I have two daughters, but they don't seem to be all that interested in this. And one of these days I'll be gone, and I don't think does me anybody any good for me to have all this research in my metal file drawer. So I thought I got to figure out a way to put this in some sort of a book that would make sense. And what I discovered after I was thinking about that was I just discovered, hey, I think I'll tell the story of his life through a love story, because he met his wife at the age of 14, fell in love because they were trading with the Creeks. His enslaver and her enslaver were traders, and they were trading with each other, and that's how they met. And then a little relationship blossomed, and before you know it, they started talking about not wanting to be enslaved and what we could do about it. And with the Civil War coming, they thought, hey, this is our opportunity. And so they escaped together to Kansas, and never looked back. And, they stayed together until they died. He was like 68 and she was like, 60 or 70 something. And so, and they had 7 children in Kansas, all of them right there in Mound City, Kansas. And so I thought, well, what a wonderful love story. So I decided to write their life in terms of a love story. So I put the book together called Contraband Hearts, and I gave it that title because that's what they were, contraband. And I don't think anybody really cared about the hearts of contraband for real, But I don't think people recognize on another angle, they didn't really recognize how strong the hearts of contraband, people who are contraband, could be.
I mean, it sounds like a beautiful love story, but also beautiful that you've chosen to memorialize their life and your efforts researching about them in that way. So as you think about Kansas, like it was a place of refuge for William and his, at the time, girlfriend. As they escaped there, it became a place that represented freedom for them, not just in the way that they got to live their lives, but also, the fact that they fought for that freedom. As you think about Kansas, what does that place mean to you?
I went to college in just across the border in Missouri, in a little town called Liberty, Missouri, which is just north of Kansas City. I had no idea when I went to college in fact, I was living in Phoenix when the time came for me to decide where I was going to go to college. And I looked at a bunch of different schools across the country, but I ended up at a tiny college called William Jewell in Liberty, Missouri, right? And for a lot of different reasons. And when I finished there, I went to law school in Kansas City. So I spent a lot of time around the border right there in Kansas City, and we would frequently go over into Kansas. And it's funny how people in Missouri kind of thought, well, Kansas is kind of second rate. It was always sort of like, you don't want to go to Kansas. Not much over there. The biggest part of Kansas City is in Missouri. It's where the football team is. That's where the basketball, all the nightclubs and the money is. But and I was part of that thought too. But when I realized how what a pivotal role the state of Kansas played in the eradication of slavery, my perspective about Kansas changed, and the people there, and the people who live there now have to be sort of the offspring of folks who were abolitionists back then. And these are the people who, those people back during the Civil War are people who provided an opportunity for William Lacey and his runaway girlfriend, Lucinda, okay, to explore their personhood. If you're someone who's enslaved and someone else is taking everything that you ever earn, everything that you ever do, and including your hopes and dreams, right? The state of Kansas, which was just next door, just on top of Oklahoma there, offers a completely different life. And if you're 15 and 14 or something like that, and you run away, not really knowing where you're going, you must have a lot of confidence, in that state. They must have heard a lot about the people and the abolitionists who were living in Kansas. I mean, we're talking about people who, like John Brown and and James Montgomery, are famous people who lived in that same area. When you think about when I think about William and Lucinda wanting to abscond to away to a land where they could become whole people, full people. Kansas is has a is that place first of all, and that's why it'll always have a warm spot in my heart to know that that the people of Kansas welcome them with open arms. It changed for me the way I saw the state of Kansas. And one of my friends read my book and called me up, and he said the same thing. He said, I didn't know that about Kansas and about what a abolitionist state it was. I knew they're called the Free State, but I didn't really know why, And now I do, thanks to your book. And so Kansas is just way more special now to me. And I've told somebody this before. I feel so much richer to know that I'm connected to people who were so tough, who cared so much about their country and about their fellow man. And it is a matter of love, and that's why it's a love story. It's love on. They were both very religious people, because I know that because of my research, and I can read their obituaries and tell how religious they were and what people said about them. And so that they loved each other from a personal standpoint of man and woman. You have to if you got to be together for 60 years, and they loved their fellow man. That's a different kind of love. So much so that they risked their lives to try to help eradicate slavery, and they loved God from an agape love standpoint. And so that's why I call it Contraband Hearts, because it focuses on love, not just necessarily, in slavery or anything like that, but love. It's the story about how they stayed together, and the Civil War was just kind of secondary to a certain extent, but it is a wonderful story.
It sounds like it. And I love that you chose the angle of love, because there's so many things in the world that we use sometimes to dehumanize one another. But love is the thing, I think, that humanizes us to one another faster than anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I'm excited to read it. Is it out yet, or is there somewhere we can learn more about it?
Yes, you can go to contrabandhearts.com. And you can order a book there. It's already been published. It's out now. It was published back in June on my mother's 100th, what would have been my mother's 100th birthday, and that was just a calling, some sort of a spiritual thing that happened. I mean, I had so many, sort of spiritual like things that happened in the development and the writing of this book that it's not even funny. After a while, I thought, this is not coincidental, and it's not serendipity. This is the calling now,
Yeah.
I've been reaching out for my ancestors for a long time, and now they're reaching back because they're putting the stuff that's being placed in my path that I didn't see all these years, that now I see and make and look at it differently.
Well, it sounds like not just the ancestors reaching out to you, but also maybe the hand of God a little bit.
Absolutely. I'm not shy to say that. I think so too.
I love that. Calvin, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing William Lacey's story with us. Your daughters might not be interested now, but one of the things that I've learned being a family historian is that, a lot of times kids and grandkids, we're not sure they're listening. We're not sure they care. But at some point, something happens in their life that, much like Glory triggered your interest in something will happen that will trigger their interest. And, hopefully you'll still be around to answer some of those questions. But if you're not, what an amazing gift you've given them by putting this together in this way.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really proud of it. It's one of the best. It's one of, if not the best thing I've ever done. So I'm really, 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 really proud of it.
Studio sponsored by Ancestry.